Hello, boys and girls at home. Hello, Miss Amy and Pinky.
Hello, Teacher Daniel.
Today we are going to begin studying a new book. The book is called Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone.
Yeah!
It is a terrible book. Reading is terrible, but we must study it because there will be a test on it.
A test? I thought this was supposed to be a book club.
Yeah, me too.
And now, the class rules. If you follow them, you will learn to hate reading as much as I do. Rule number 1, no talking. Rule number 2, no smiling. Rule number 3, no having fun. Rule number 4, no questions. Rule number 5, no talking.
Miss Amy, I think something's wrong with Mr. Daniel.
Yeah, I know what you mean. He says he hates reading.
Hey, you two, didn't you see rule number 1 and rule number 5? No talking.
Sorry.
Don't be sorry. Just don't do it. Now please turn to page 1 and read with me.
At least we can read Harry Potter.
Yeah, I just love this book. Sorry.
Pinky, you can read first. Pinky? Good, Pinky. You remembered rules 1 and 5. I will read. You will not read out loud. Chapter 1. The Boy Who Lived. Okay, we will stop here. Please take out your dictionary and look up the word chapter. Write out what it means, and then write it in your notebook 50 times. After that, look up the word 1. Write out what it means, then write the word 50 times.
It's working!
After that,
I have stolen Mr. Daniel's imagination, and now he's making Miss Amy and Miss Pinky hate reading too. Soon they will teach others to hate reading, and then the whole world will hate reading, just like me.
After that, look up the word boy in the dictionary and write down the meaning. Then write the word boy 50 times in your notebook.
1 hour later.
Next sentence. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. Let's stop there. Please look up the word Mr. in the dictionary.
Something's really wrong. Harry Potter is a fantasy story. Mr. Daniel usually loves fantasy stories.
Look up the word Dursley in the dictionary.
Yeah, it's
Write the
like he
meaning.
has lost his
Just
spirit.
kidding.
It
It's
must
Mr.
be a
Dursley's name.
spell.
What? How did they guess it was a spell? No matter. Soon I will have their imagination too, and they will hate reading as much as me.
After that, look up the word of. in
Oh,
the
my head hurts. I don't feel like reading anymore.
Me neither.
It's working!
After that, look up the word.
Reading should be
number
fun,
in the
but
dictionary.
I don't want to read
Write down what
anymore.
it means.
Yeah,
Then
we
write the word
need to
number 300
break the
times.
spell.
No talking. How will you pass the test if you are not listening? Now you must write out all the words in Harry Potter 100 times.
That's it! Mr. Daniel, I don't know what's wrong with you, but reading is supposed to be a joyful adventure.
Sit down.
Huh? What's this?
Reading is for passing tests, and passing tests only. It is the way.
Mr. Daniel, Pinky is right. This is no way to read.
That's it. Now you must write every word in Harry Potter in your notebook 200 times.
Pinky, I think his imagination has been stolen.
300 times.
You're right, but how do we break the spell so we can all enjoy reading Harry Potter together?
Write down what it means. Then write the word 300 After that, look up the word of in the dictionary.
Stella the grumpy elf! Did someone call?
No, not Stella!
Stella, someone has stolen Mr. Daniel's imagination.
Yeah, he is reading now. He even hates Harry Potter.
After
Mr.
that,
Daniel, are you there?
look up the word for in the
Oh
dictionary.
no, not again.
Write down what it means.
It's worse than I thought. I bet it's that old witch, Stagatha Drearly. She took his color
Look up the
too.
word privet in the dictionary.
Stella, can you help him? Sure, he just needs a little vacation.
Untie.
Where to?
To his own imagination. It won't be easy, but you can help him.
Dictionary.
Help him? How?
What it means.
You need to use your own imaginations. Read Harry Potter for fun. Okay, get reading. No problem. Restorio Imaginarium.
One hour later. Wow! Where am I?
We're in your imagination, in a fantasy story to be precise.
What? Stella, what's going on?
Stagatha Drearly has stolen your imagination. We need to get it back, so we're taking a trip through fantasy stories.
Oh, that's weird. But what do you mean by fantasy story? I don't get it.
Fantasy is a genre or type of fictional story. You know, like stories with unreal things like magic, elves, or dragons. The word fantasy means imaginary, make-believe, or pretend. It comes from an older word meaning visions or dreams.
Oh, so reading fantasy stories forces me to use my imagination?
Reading forces you to use it, so it will have no choice but to come back to you. Stagatha's spell is no match for reading, especially if you're reading fantasy stories.
So I'm reading right now?
Yeah, but with a little help from my magic.
Must be a cool story. Look at that!
That's why it's such good imagination practice. Fantasy contains unreal things that could never be real in our world. It breaks the rules of how our world works. For example, in fantasy stories, winter may never end because the land has been put under a spell.
Oh, you're talking about Narnia, aren't you? I know this place. This is Narnia, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Or in fantasy, a brother and sister might find a magic treehouse that takes them to different times and places.
Wow, look at that! Hi, Jack! Hi, Annie! Wow, so Magic Treehouse is fantasy too?
It sure is. And in fantasy, a boy might find out that he is a wizard and suddenly find himself going to a famous school of magic.
Hey, you're talking about Harry Potter, the book we're reading now.
That's right, wizards and magic aren't real in our world, but fantasy authors make unreal things real in the world of their stories.
Wow, so any story with talking animals, magic, or monsters is fantasy? That's a big genre.
Yes, it is. That's why in these days we split the fantasy genre into even smaller genres.
Like what?
If the story takes place in the real world, but the real world has some unreal things in it, we call that low fantasy. Magic Treehouse is low fantasy, and so are superhero stories. That's because they take place in the real world. The rules are mostly the same, but some rules are different. Like some people having superpowers.
Hey! Watch where you're going!
But if the story takes place in an entirely made-up world, which has a lot of unreal things, and where magic and strange creatures wouldn't surprise anybody, we call these stories high fantasy.
Oh, you mean like Avatar? Or my favorite, Lord of the Rings?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Cool. Fantasy's pretty amazing, boys and girls.
The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings take place in a completely imaginary world, which has lots of magic and different rules about what is possible.
Oh, I see.
High fantasy often involves a quest. A quest is a long, dangerous journey where a lowly hero usually has to do something heroic, like Frodo having to destroy the evil ring.
Oh, I see. But what about Harry Potter? Harry Potter takes place in the real world, where most people don't know anything about magic. But it also takes place in the wizarding world, where magic and magical creatures are everywhere.
Harry Potter is kind of special. It's both low fantasy and high fantasy at the same time. It's low fantasy when it takes place in our world, the Muggle world, but it's high fantasy when it takes place in the wizarding world.
I guess that means in fantasy, anything can happen. It's just up to the author's imagination.
That's right. Do you feel your imagination coming back?
Sure I do. I can't wait to get started. But Stella, I have one more question.
Okay, what is it?
Is imagination practice the only reason we read fantasy?
Of course not. Like all good stories, the characters are like us, like real people. And even though it's fantasy, we make connections from the issues and troubles the characters face to what happens in our own lives. For example, if a hero must overcome fear to fight a big scary monster, that might make us think about the times we face big scary things in our own lives, like an important test or a bully.
So with the help of our imagination, fantasy stories can help us understand the real world even better? Cool!
Terrific! It looks like the spell has done its job.
All right, Harry Potter, here I come.
What's happening? No! Stella did it again! Ooh, I hate Stella!
Take that, Stagatha!
Wow, I'm back. Hello, boys and girls. Hello, Miss Pinky. Hello, Amy. Are you ready to read Harry Potter?
Yeah!
What's this? We won't be needing those rules anymore. Boys and girls, it's time to get started on our brand new reading adventure. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone.
We haven't got to the sorting hat ceremony yet, and we won't get there for a little while, but as you can see, I'm really hoping for a certain house.
I'm hoping I can go to Gryffindor. And look, Skelly, he's hoping he can go to Slytherin. Guess we'll have to wait and see. Boys and girls, you're going to get sorted into a house too. Unless you want to make your own house. Oh, I'm sorry. How rude of me. I forgot to say hello. Hello, boys and girls. Or should I say, hello, wizards and witches. Welcome to a brand new Harry Potter book club class, series, lesson, thing. Harry Potter, Mr. Daniels, Harry Potter, Mr. Daniels Harry Potter Reading Club. That's right, boys and girls. We're going to call this a reading club because clubs mean fun, and I hope we can have some fun together in our reading club. Hey, who's that? Oh, it's Hagrid. All right, wizards and witches. Before we begin, I just want to tell you a little bit about this class book club thing. Number one, we can't read the whole book together. Harry Potter is a long, long book. So a lot of the reading you're going to have to do on your own. So before coming to the book club, I want you to read Harry Potter for fun. Today we're doing chapter 1. So if you haven't read it yet, go and read it now. Don't worry if you can't understand everything. Just read it for the story. Read it to know what's going on. In this class, we'll take a closer look at parts of each chapter. We'll learn some new language. And after that, we're going to practice that new language by retelling the chapter. And after the retelling, that's when the fun stuff starts. We're going to learn some reading skills and some writing skills to help you become better readers, to make you understand Harry Potter even more. And we're going to use those reading skills for writing. You are going to create your very own wizarding school, your own fantasy characters, your own Hogwarts house. Oh, and maybe even your own school song.
Hogwarts, Hogwarts, Hoggy Woggy Hogwarts, teach us something.
You'll also be writing a newspaper article about something that happens in your story, and lots of other cool stuff. So boys and girls, why don't we get to it? Let's begin Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Potato.
No.
Sorry. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Potato.
No.
Oh, sorry. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. By the way, if you're wondering why sometimes this book is called Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, and other times it's called Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, don't worry, it's the same book. The Sorcerer's Stone uses American English. That means the words are spelt in a way that we are used to from Magic Treehouse and other classes you have in China. But if you have Philosopher's Stone, don't worry, it's the same book. All right, boys and girls, here we go. Chapter 1, The Boy Who Lived. Before we begin our reading, let's go deep into the magic cave and look at our language targets for today. These are words, phrases, idioms. We'll learn about those too. And other language that you can use right away. All right, boys and girls, let's get to our language. Hey, who's that grumpy looking guy? Is that a teacher? Language target number 1, to not hold with something. To disapprove. Mr. Daniel does not hold with students who smile in class. Just kidding! You can smile all you want. You can laugh, you can talk, you can sing, you can even jump around because I can't even see you. Unless you come to our Sunday night classes, you can WeChat Miss Amy at the number here. It's really fun. Language target number 2. Mr. Daniel shuddered to think of what would happen if he lost his magic potato. Ooh, I don't even want to think about that. That would be so bad. Number 3, determined not to. Because it was such a bad thing to think about, Mr. Daniel was determined not to lose his magic potato. He taped it to his head. Number 4, to flinch when you move like this. Because something startles you or frightens you. Mr. Daniel flinched when the coronavirus came into his room. Number 5, exasperated. Oh, hello, Harry. When you're exasperated, you're very annoyed or frustrated or irritated by something. Be quiet. I said be quiet. I'm trying to teach, be quiet. Mr. Daniel was getting exasperated by the coronavirus. Go away. That's better.
Famous.
But why am I famous?
Well, boys and girls, it is time to go into the wizarding world. I am so excited. I am so excited. Let's get to our main reading. Let's open up this book. Before we read each part of the book, I want you to think about what we're about to read and see if you can find the answer to our comprehension questions. So let's begin with comprehension question number 1. From what you know so far of the Dursleys, what do you think undursley-ish means? And why? Well, this answer will become more clear in a moment. What does undursley-ish mean? Chapter 1, The Boy Who Lived. Oh, there's a little baby in a little baby bundle. So we're going to begin today's lesson by looking at the beginning of chapter 1. There's page 1 and the top of page 2. So let's begin our reading. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. You might be confused. Why does it say thank you very much? Well, in English, if someone asks you a question and that question kind of makes you a little angry, like, why are you asking me that? It kind of means, I don't like your question and I'm not talking about it anymore. So if someone came up to you and said, here, let me help you spell the word cat, you might say, hey, I can spell cat myself, thank you very much. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal, thank you very much. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious, because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. So we're learning a lot about the Dursleys. They don't hold with anything strange or mysterious. They're perfectly normal, thank you very much. My sister does not hold with the idea of dancing robots. She thinks robots should be for work only. Too bad my robots love to dance. Yep, sorry sis. Professor McGonagall does not hold with rude behavior from her students. I like making jokes, but I do not hold with people who use jokes to make people feel bad. Yeah, that's true.
Harry, no way.
Hermione doesn't hold with Harry disobeying the teacher and flying.
What an idiot. Now, if you two don't
Hermione
mind,
doesn't
I'm
hold
back.
with Ron and Harry wandering around at night and getting in trouble.
Or worse, expelled.
Yep, doesn't approve. Hermione doesn't hold with students who don't pay attention in class. To not hold with something, boys and girls, to not approve of an activity or an idea. I do not hold with you putting potatoes in my nose. Well, unless they're delicious, of course. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious, because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. Mr. Dursley was the director of a firm called Grunnings, which made drills. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a very large mustache. Okay, so Mr. Dursley was the director of a firm. That just means he was like a boss in a company. And the company was Grunnings, and it made drills. There's a drill. And he was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck. Can you guess what beefy means? You might think it means fat, but actually it does not mean fat. It can mean fat, it just means heavy and strong. If you're beefy, you're heavy and strong. Yu Yang is a big, beefy man who loves to play the cello. He's also the strongest man in China. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a very large mustache. Mrs. Dursley was thin and blonde and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which came in very useful as she spent so much of her time craning over garden fences, spying on her neighbors. Oh, so Mrs. Dursley, she's got a long neck. It's twice the usual amount of neck, and she uses it for craning, to spy on her neighbors. To crane means to stretch out your neck in order to see something. Princess Leia craned her neck to look around the corner, and she was spying on her neighbors, watching them secretly. Mrs. Dursley was thin and blonde and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which came in very useful as she spent so much of her time craning over garden fences, spying on her neighbors. The Dursleys had a small son called Dudley, and in their opinion, there was no finer boy anywhere. So the Dursleys, they really are proud of being normal, and I wonder if that gives us clues about what un-Dursleyish might mean. The Dursleys had everything they wanted, but they also had a secret, and their greatest fear was that someone would discover it. They didn't think they could bear it if anyone found out about the Potters. They didn't think they could bear it, to tolerate it. Thomas can't bear to eat spicy food. Even pepper is too spicy for him. They didn't think they could bear it if anyone found out about the Potters. Mrs. Potter was Mrs. Dursley's sister, but they hadn't met for several years. In fact, Mrs. Dursley pretended she didn't have a sister, because her sister and her good-for-nothing husband were as un-Dursleyish as it was possible to be. Well, I guess Mrs. Dursley thinks un-Dursleyish is a bad thing, and she even thinks that her sister's husband is good for nothing. I bet you can guess what that means. The Dursleys shuddered to think what the neighbors would say if the Potters arrived in the street. First of all, to shudder means to tremble suddenly when you're scared or kind of disgusted by something. Sen shuddered when the river monster gave her some money.
Don't make him wait.
So if you shudder to think, this is a phrase in English, and it means something is so worrying that you don't even want to think about it. Like just thinking about it makes you, don't like that. Sarah shuddered to think what would happen if she couldn't find her friend's dog. Uh-oh, you lost your friend's dog? Ooh. Jerry shuddered to think of what might happen if the ghost came back to his apartment. Must have been a scary ghost. Lulu shuddered to think of what her parents would do if they found out she failed the test. Ooh. My mom shuddered to think of what the neighbors would say if I married a potato. Oh my gosh, I don't even want to think about that. Diggy Dog shuddered to think of what might happen if Mr. Chompy got mad and bit him. I bet it would hurt. Shudder to think. When something is so worrying, you don't even want to think about it. Can you make a sentence and use shuddered to think? The Dursleys shuddered to think what the neighbors would say if the Potters arrived in the street. The Dursleys knew that the Potters had a small son, too, but they had never seen him. This boy was another good reason for keeping the Potters away. They didn't want Dudley mixing with a child like that. Well, they really don't like the Potters, and they don't even want their son Dudley mixing with the Potter's son. Mixing with just means playing with. All right, and there is the end of the first part of our reading. In between the parts we read together, we'll do a little retelling, just so we keep the story fresh in our minds. So we meet the Dursleys, and then Mr. Dursley leaves for work. And on his way to work, he sees a cat reading a map. There's a cat, and it's a tabby cat. Oh, by the way, tabby cats, they have a little M on their forehead. And then Mr. Dursley drives to work, and on his way to work, he sees people who are wearing very strange clothes, and he really doesn't like that. He doesn't approve. He doesn't hold with people wearing strange clothes. And then at work, Mr. Dursley doesn't notice all the strange things happening outside, like owls flying back and forth outside his window. He doesn't notice because his back is to the window. And then at lunch, he gets a bit worried because he thinks he hears people talking about the Potters. Doesn't like that. And then later in the day, he gets hugged by a happy, strangely dressed old man who says everyone should be celebrating. Just like that. Mr. Dursley really doesn't like strange things, and he doesn't want any strange things coming to him. And that brings us to our next reading part, and our next comprehension question, number 2. Which strange events were reported on the news? So we're going to read the bottom of page 5 and all of page 6 together. We're going to begin here. Now, Mr. Dursley is just coming home from work. As he pulled into the driveway of number 4, the first thing he saw, and it didn't improve his mood, was the tabby cat he'd spotted that morning. It was now sitting on his garden wall. He was sure it was the same one. It had the same markings around its eyes. "Shoo!" said Mr. Dursley loudly. The cat didn't move. It just gave him a stern look. A stern look. It's a look that says, "Don't mess with me." It just gave him a stern look. Was this normal cat behavior? Mr. Dursley wondered. Trying to pull himself together, right? Trying to calm down, think, calm down. Trying to pull himself together, he let himself into the house. He was still determined not to mention anything to his wife. He was determined not to. If you are determined, that means you want to do something so much you're not going to let anything stop you. Mulan was determined to make it to the top of the pole. See, she was determined. She wouldn't stop until she got there. But Mr. Dursley was determined not to do something. Harry is about to play in his first Quidditch match. Both teams are determined not to lose the first game of the year. The Gryffindor player is determined not to let the Slytherin player score. See? He stopped it.
Harry holds on tight. He is determined not to fall off his broom because it is a long way down. Harry is determined to catch the snitch. But the other player is determined not to let Harry catch it. But he can't keep up with Harry. Harry's got it. Determined not to. When you want to not let something happen very much. He was still determined not to mention anything to his wife. Mrs. Dursley had a nice, normal day. She told him over dinner all about Mrs. Next Door's problems with her daughter and how Dudley had learned a new word, won't. Mr. Dursley tried to act normally. When Dudley had been put to bed, he went into the living room in time to catch the last report on the evening news. You know, the news? A lot of grown-ups like to watch the news report before they go to bed in the evening. And finally, bird watchers everywhere have reported that the nation's owls have been behaving very unusually today. Although owls normally hunt at night and are hardly ever seen in daylight, there have been hundreds of sightings of these birds flying in every direction since sunrise. Experts are unable to explain why the owls have suddenly changed their sleeping pattern. Oh, that's right, owls usually sleep in the day. The newscaster allowed himself a grin. Most mysterious. And now, over to Jim McGuffin with the weather. Going to be any more showers of owls tonight, Jim? Showers? Is it gonna rain owls? Well, Ted, said the weatherman, I don't know about that, but it's not only the owls that have been acting oddly today. Viewers as far apart as Kent, Yorkshire, and Dundee have been phoning in to tell me that instead of the rain I promised yesterday, they've had a downpour of shooting stars. Downpour, a rainstorm. Oh my gosh, so people have been seeing owls in the day, and they've been seeing a downpour of shooting stars. Remember our comprehension question? Perhaps people have been celebrating bonfire night early. It's not until next week, folks. Bonfire night, it's a holiday in England where people light fires. But I can promise a wet night tonight. Mr. Dursley sat frozen in his armchair. Shooting stars all over Britain? Owls flying by daylight? Mysterious people in cloaks all over the place? And a whisper about Potters. All right, so let's move forward a little bit. So let's see, Mr. Dursley is worried, and he's worried because he and his wife are perfectly normal, thank you very much. But there are so many strange things happening, and he heard the name Potter, so I think he's worried that somehow he might be involved in all of this strangeness. So the evening goes on, and Mr. Dursley asks Mrs. Dursley about the Potter's son, Harry, and Mrs. Dursley is very upset. She doesn't like him talking about the Potters at all. So he stops talking to her about the Potters, and then he gets ready for bed, but he notices the cat is still there. And then the story stops following Mr. Dursley and goes outside of number 4 Privet Drive, and we see appearing on Privet Drive a strange-looking man named Albus Dumbledore. And then on page 9, we see that this man, Albus Dumbledore, puts out all the streetlights with some magical device. Oh, they show this in the movie. There he is. And then the cat turns into a woman named Professor McGonagall. And Dumbledore and McGonagall have a conversation. And we learn that all those strange things that are happening are actually celebrations. Those people are very happy about something. And they're happy for the first time in 11 years because someone named you-know-who is gone. Mysterious. So let's read a little closer. Comprehension question number 3. What happened to Harry Potter's parents? And question number 4. Why does Dumbledore
think it is best for Harry Potter to live with the Dursleys. So get your books. We are going to be reading all of page 11, all of page 12, and most of page 13. We're going to read those together. Okay, page 12. We're going to begin right there. And Dumbledore just offered Professor McGonagall lemon drop candy. No, thank you, said Professor McGonagall coldly, as though she didn't think this was the moment for lemon drops. As I say, even if you know who has gone.
My dear Professor, surely a sensible person like yourself can call him by his name. All this you-know-who nonsense. For 11 years I've been trying to persuade people to call him by his proper name, Voldemort.
Professor McGonagall flinched, but Dumbledore, who was unsticking 2 lemon drops, seemed not to notice. Lots of good language here. So first of all, Voldemort calls Professor McGonagall a sensible person. If you're sensible, you make good decisions, maybe you're even wise. Sally was a sensible kid. She always wore a helmet when she went bike riding. And to persuade means you get someone to agree with you because you give them good reasons to. I used to believe that milk came from ghosts, but my friend Katie showed me the science. She persuaded me that I was wrong. Now I know that milk comes from zombies.
No!
What?
No!
No, milk does not come from zombies, boys and girls. And when Dumbledore said the name Voldemort, McGonagall flinched. And that means you make a sudden movement when you're scared or surprised by something. Bob flinched when Mary jumped at him. They flinch.
Oh my God, you actually are kind of
James
shy.
likes to try to make famous people flinch when they come on his show. On this show, he wants to see who in the famous singing group Blackpink will flinch. To play the flinching game, they stand behind some plastic. Then James shoots fruit at them.
Really, does that make you feel more confident, Jenny?
No, it makes
Jenny flinches, but Jisoo doesn't flinch at all. Now it's time for Lisa and
Will you
Rosé.
be thinking of this while you're at Coachella this weekend in front of all those people?
I hope not.
Rosé flinches a lot, but Lisa only flinches a little.
Times, you know, we've
Now
played
it's
a few
James's
with two
turn.
different people.
He doesn't flinch at all. Would you flinch? To flinch, boys and girls, when you make a small sudden movement from being scared or surprised. Can you show me a flinch?
All this you-know-who nonsense. For 11 years I've been trying to persuade people to call him by his proper name, Voldemort.
Professor McGonagall flinched, but Dumbledore, who was unsticking 2 lemon drops, seemed not to notice.
It all gets so confusing if we keep saying you-know-who. I have never seen any reason to be frightened of saying Voldemort's name.
I know you haven't, said Professor McGonagall, sounding half exasperated, half admiring. So she was a little exasperated, and that means kind of annoyed or frustrated. Shell is exasperated by her friends. They didn't listen to her, and now the gold is being thrown away. See? She's exasperated. She's had enough. Now the gold is gone. Mr. Penn is waiting in line, but the line is moving too slowly. He is getting more and more exasperated. He sighs loudly to show his exasperation. He shows his watch. He is getting really exasperated.
$1.25? Okay.
He shows his exasperation by walking up and giving the clerk dirty looks, like mean, angry looks. See? His exasperation is too much for him. He starts shaking the shelf in anger.
Sir.
He isn't exasperated anymore, but it looks like he's forgotten to buy anything. Now he's embarrassed more than exasperated. He runs away. Exasperated. Very annoyed or frustrated. Do you ever get exasperated? I know you haven't, said Professor McGonagall, sounding half exasperated, half admiring. But you're different. Everyone knows you're the only one you know. Oh, all right. Voldemort was frightened of. You flatter me, said Dumbledore calmly. So Dumbledore says, "Oh, Professor McGonagall, you flatter me. And if you flatter someone, it means you say good things about them to make them feel good. Sometimes what you say is true, and sometimes when you flatter someone, you're not saying the truth." Dragons love being flattered. Bilbo flatters Smaug so that the dragon won't eat him. See?
If you really were as great as the old tales say. Oh, you're so magnificent. You're so magnificent. Don't eat me. You flatter me, said Dumbledore calmly. Voldemort had powers I will never have. Wow, Voldemort must have been a very powerful person, wizard, bad guy. You flatter me, said Dumbledore calmly. Voldemort had powers I will never have. Only because you're too, well, noble to use them. It's lucky it's dark. I haven't blushed so much since Madame Pomfrey told me she liked my new earmuffs. Oh, so we learned a couple of things there. Dumbledore is very powerful. In fact, he's just as powerful as the bad guy Voldemort, but he's too noble to use his powers in a bad way. Noble means you're good in an honest, kind, and brave way. Godric Gryffindor was a noble wizard from long ago. He was one of the legends who started Hogwarts School. We also learn that Voldemort is humble. He doesn't brag. He said, "Oh, you make me blush. You flatter me. No one's made me blush since Madame Pomfrey complimented me on my earmuffs." So Voldemort, we've learnt, is very good and very powerful. Professor McGonagall shot a sharp look at Dumbledore and said, "The owls are nothing next to the rumors that are flying around." And a rumor, it's news, but it's news that people kind of tell each other. It's not like from the TV or anything like that, so you don't know if it's true or if it's not true. There was a rumor that our teacher was quitting because Mr. Monster joined our class. It wasn't true. He was just tired that day. Oh, okay. The rumors were not true. Professor McGonagall shot a sharp look at Dumbledore and said, "The owls are nothing next to the rumors that are flying around. You know what everyone's saying? About why he's disappeared? About what finally stopped him?" It seemed that Professor McGonagall had reached the point she was most anxious to discuss, the one she really wanted to talk about. The real reason she had been waiting on a cold, hard wall all day, for neither as a cat nor as a woman had she fixed Dumbledore with such a piercing stare as she did now. Piercing stare. And there's Professor McGonagall. She's got a piercing stare. It's a stare that can poke right through you. It was plain that whatever everyone was saying, she was not going to believe it until Dumbledore told her it was true. Dumbledore, however, was choosing another lemon drop and did not answer. "What they're saying," she pressed on, "is that last night Voldemort turned up in Godric's Hollow. He went there to find the Potters. The rumor is that Lily and James Potter that they're dead." Dumbledore bowed his head. Professor McGonagall gasped. "Lily and James! I can't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. Oh, Albus." Dumbledore reached out and patted her on the shoulder. I know, he said heavily.
Professor McGonagall's voice trembled as she went on. That's not all. They're saying he tried to kill the Potter's son, Harry, but he couldn't. He couldn't kill that little boy. No one knows why or how, but they're saying that when he couldn't kill Harry Potter, Voldemort's powers somehow broke. And that's why he's gone. Dumbledore nodded glumly. Glumly, sadly. It's true? Faltered Professor McGonagall. Faltered like she couldn't speak properly. She almost tripped over when she was trying to speak. After all he's done, all the people he's killed, he couldn't kill a little boy? It's just astounding. It's astounding. It's very surprising or shocking. To see my cat Mittens riding a broom. It was astounding. I had no idea she was a witch. It's just astounding. Of all the things to stop him? But how in the name of heaven did Harry survive? We can only guess, said Dumbledore. We may never know. Professor McGonagall pulled out a lace handkerchief and dabbed at her eyes beneath her spectacles. Yes, she took out a handkerchief and dabbed the tears from her eyes. That's dab. You might know dab as that silly dance that people do. Well, that's not the same dab we're talking about here. Professor McGonagall pulled out a lace handkerchief and dabbed at her eyes beneath her spectacles, her glasses. Dumbledore gave a great sniff as he took a golden watch from his pocket and examined it. It was a very odd watch. It had 12 hands but no numbers. Instead, little planets were moving around the edge. It must have made sense to Dumbledore, though, because he put it back in his pocket and said,
Hagrid's late. I suppose it was he who told you I'd be here, by the way.
Yes, said Professor McGonagall. And I don't suppose you're going to tell me why you're here, of all places. Of all places, like, why this place? It doesn't make sense.
I've come to bring Harry to his aunt and uncle. They're the only family he has left now.
You don't mean. You can't mean the people who live here, cried Professor McGonagall, jumping to her feet and pointing at number 4. Dumbledore, you can't. I've been watching them all day. You couldn't find 2 people who are less like us. And they've got this son. I saw him kicking his mother all the way up the street, screaming for sweets. Harry Potter come and live here?
It's the best place for him, said Dumbledore firmly. His aunt and uncle will be able to explain everything to him when he's older. I've written them a letter.
A letter? Repeated Professor McGonagall faintly, quietly, sitting back down on the wall. Really, Dumbledore, you think you can explain all this in a letter? These people will never understand him. He'll be famous, a legend. Oh, Harry's going to be a legend, and a legend is just a very, very famous person. Albus Dumbledore was a legend in the wizarding world. He was the most famous wizard there was. I wouldn't be surprised if today was known as Harry Potter Day in the future. There will be books written about Harry. Every child in our world will know his name.
Exactly,
said Dumbledore, looking very seriously over the top of his half-moon glasses.
It would be enough to turn any boy's head.
To turn any boy's head, to make them think that they're the best thing in the whole world. Ah, I think this might be the answer to our comprehension question. Why did Dumbledore want Harry Potter to live there? If Harry Potter grew up famous and everyone worshipped him, they said how wonderful he was, that might turn Harry's head. It might make Harry a bad person, like, oh, I'm so good, you're all bad, me, 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 me. What do you think?
It would be enough to turn any boy's head. Famous before he can walk and talk. Famous for something he won't even remember. Can't you see how much better off he'll be growing up away from all that until he's ready to take it?
All right, so let's skip forward a little bit, and they continue talking, and then someone named Hagrid arrives on a flying motorcycle. Do-do-do-do-do. Very cool. Ooh, he's a very big guy, too. And we also learned that Hagrid is friends with Dumbledore and McGonagall, and he has brought baby Harry. who has a lightning-shaped scar on his forehead. Oh, and there's Hagrid with baby Harry. And then they talk a little bit, and they leave Harry at the Dursleys' door and say goodbye. And it's a very sad goodbye, because they know they won't see Harry for a long time. So our last comprehension question, question number 5. Why are people calling Harry the boy who lived? And we're just going to read the very end of chapter 1, page 17. A breeze ruffled the neat hedges of Privet Drive. Ruffle just means to make something smooth, messy, or uneven. The cockatoo stretches and ruffles his feather. See that? He ruffled his feathers. A breeze ruffled the neat hedges of Privet Drive, which lay silent and tidy under the inky sky, the very last place you would expect astonishing things to happen. Harry Potter rolled over inside his blankets without waking up. One small hand closed on the letter beside him, and he slept on, not knowing he was special, not knowing he was famous, not knowing he would be woken in a few hours' time by Mrs. Dursley's scream as she opened the front door to put out milk bottles, nor that he would spend the next few weeks being prodded and pinched by his cousin Dudley. Prodded, and pinched. He couldn't know that at this very moment, people meeting in secret all over the country were holding up their glasses and saying in hushed voices, "To Harry Potter, the boy who lived." Why did they say that? I think we know the story already, don't we? And that is the end of chapter 1, boys and girls. Wow! We learned so many things in that chapter. I think we should do a retelling to help us remember. And of course, that is what we will do right now. Let's retell chapter 1 together. Oh boy, oh boy. But in case you're new to retelling or you haven't done it too much, let's talk a little bit about what retelling is and why we do it. First of all, what do readers do? Well, as a reader, you have 2 main jobs. You're learning English, and so one of your main jobs is just to figure out what the words mean. We'll talk about the best ways of doing this in another lesson. And your second job is to think about and understand the story and the ideas in the story. And both of these things can be helped by retelling. Retelling helps us understand and remember the words and ideas in the texts we read, so we can talk to others about it. When we retell a story, we tell the important parts, the key details of a text. Text just means anything that's written down. Oh, and by the way, re just means again, so retell, tell again. Retelling also gives us a chance to practice speaking and using our new words. And we don't just retell after we read. Good readers retell before, during, and after reading. If you retell before reading, means you think and retell what already happened in the story. This helps us remember things. It helps us refresh our memory and get ready for the next chapter. In lesson 2, we'll do a retelling before the lesson to help us remember. You can also retell during the reading. Good readers stop as they read to make sure they understand what they are reading. Retelling parts we've just read helps us remember important events and information. So if we read this paragraph here where Dumbledore says, it would be enough to turn any boy's head, famous before he can walk and talk, famous for something he won't even remember. Can't you see how much better off he'll be growing up away from all that until he's ready to take it? You might think to yourself, oh, okay, so McGonagall didn't think it was a good idea because the Dursleys were very unlike them. But Dumbledore thought it was best for Harry because if he grew up famous for something he didn't even know about, it might make him into a worse person. Okay, I understand. So thinking and retelling while you're reading is a good way to help you understand what you're reading. And finally, after reading. When you finish reading a chapter, stop to think about it. Think about what just happened and what might happen next. And this is what we're going to do together today. So first of all, we're going to help us organize our thoughts and remember things by using this organizer. Instructions. Skim through the chapter you just finished. Note the key details on this organizer. Key details are just the important parts, and they can be characters, settings, events, problems, solutions, or other information. Use this organizer to help you retell the chapter out loud. Say it in your own words. And try to use some of the new language targets in the retelling. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is skim through the chapter and choose the key details you want to include in your retelling. Oh, and to skim through just means go very quickly. You don't read it, you just go through the chapter very quickly. Look for important things that you can remember. Doesn't mean you have to read it again. You're just going through it. Ah, okay, I remember that. Oh yeah, that's important. Oh, okay, yep, that one's important. Okay, that one. Okay. And you just go through the chapter very quickly and pick out the important details. So I've already skimmed through the chapter again, and now I'm going to write down some details in this organizer. First of all, the title is The Boy Who Lived. Okay, easy enough. And the characters, we'll put them in here. Just list the important characters in the chapter. Mr. Dursley, Mrs. Dursley, Albus Dumbledore, Professor McGonagall, Hagrid, and Harry Potter. I know there's some other characters, but let's just put the important ones here. And the settings of this chapter are Privet Drive, the Dursleys' house, yes, inside the house, and Mr. Dursley's office. And we'll write our language targets right here so that while we are retelling, we might be able to use some. Now, you don't have to use them all, but just try to use at least 2 or 3 of them. Okay, and if there are any problems or solutions in the story, you can write them here. In long books like Harry Potter, there might be some problems in a chapter, but the solution doesn't come until later. Or maybe a chapter has a solution about a problem that happened before the chapter. I was thinking about this chapter, and I thought of 2 problems. Mr. Dursley's problem was that he was afraid that he might get mixed up in all the strangeness that was happening. And he didn't really solve it. Remember, he was worried. He was really scared because he heard the Potter's name and all these strange things were happening. He's like, uh-oh. But he actually didn't solve it. He just went to bed. And the wizard's problem was that Harry needed a place to grow up because his parents were dead. And they solved the problem by leaving Harry with the Dursleys. All right, and now the important part. What happens? List the events of the chapter. The important events anyways. So here are the events that I wrote down. If you want to take a close look at them, you can pause the video right now and read them. Or you can just listen to Mr. Daniel, because I'm going to use these to show you how I would do a retelling for this chapter. Remember, your retelling doesn't have to be just like Mr. Daniel's retelling. Okay, let's retell. The title of chapter 1 was The Boy Who Lived. The characters in this chapter are Mr. and Mrs. Dursley, Albus Dumbledore, Professor McGonagall, Hagrid, and Harry Potter. The setting of the chapter is on Privet Drive, inside the Dursleys' house, and in Mr. Dursley's office. The problem of this chapter is that Mr. Dursley was worried that he was going to get involved in some strangeness. He didn't solve the problem. And the wizards wanted to find a place for Harry Potter to live because his parents were dead. They left Harry at the Dursleys. At the beginning of the chapter, we meet the Dursley family, who are very normal, thank you very much. We also learn that Mrs. Dursley hates her sister's family, the Potters, because she thinks they're strange, and the Dursleys do not hold with such nonsense. After that, Mr. Dursley leaves for work, but he thinks he sees something very strange, a cat standing up and reading a map. He continues to work, and he sees more strange things. Well, strange people. People are dressed in strange-looking clothes. cloaks and robes of bright colors. And then he continues on to work, and on the way to work he sees more strange things. People wearing very strange clothes, colorful robes. More strange things happen while he's at work. There are owls flying everywhere, but he doesn't see them because his back is to the window. But at lunchtime, he does hear some of these strange people talking about the Potters. And he's worried that they might be talking about his sister's sister. Mr. Dursley does not want to get mixed up in anything strange or unusual. In the middle of the chapter, Mr. Dursley goes home and he sees that the cat is still on the wall. And he hears that strange things are happening all over the country. He is determined not to ask his wife about the Potters, but he can't help it. He asks her and she gets angry. She doesn't want to talk about the Potters. So Mr. Dursley goes to bed very worried, and the cat is still outside. And then a strange man shows up outside on Privet Drive. His name is Aldous Dumbledore. And the first thing he does is put out all the streetlights with magic. And then the cat turns into a person, a woman named Professor McGonagall. Professor McGonagall and Aldous Dumbledore have a conversation, and we learn many things about what's going on. We learn that the people in the strange clothes are celebrating something. They're celebrating that someone named Voldemort is gone, and he must have been really bad, because they haven't had anything to celebrate in 11 years. We also learned that Mr. Dursley was right. The Potters were involved, but sadly we learned that Mr. and Mrs. Potter were killed. But their son, Harry, is still alive. The Potters were killed by Voldemort, and McGonagall flinches just hearing his name. So we know that Voldemort must have been very, very bad. Professor McGonagall also gets a little exasperated because Dumbledore wants Harry to live with the Dursleys. She thinks the Dursleys are too different from them, and it wouldn't be good for Harry. But Dumbledore says it would be a good place for Harry to live because he won't grow up famous. He doesn't want Harry to turn his head to think he's the best. And then a big, hairy giant arrives on a flying motorcycle. His name is Hagrid, and he's brought baby Harry. We learn that Hagrid is quite kind, and then in the end, McGonagall, Dumbledore, and Hagrid say a sad goodbye to Harry Potter and leave him outside the door of the Dursley family's house. All right, boys and girls, it is your turn. Get that graphic organizer, skim through the chapter, take some notes, and then retell chapter 1. I'll see you in our language arts class coming up.